Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 12 quarterback rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be covering all topics related to the quarterback position, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, in order to give us some more insight as to who has the most advantageous matchup going into the week and how that is potentially going to affect the upside of a given player. After we talk about matchups for all 32 teams, we'll go ahead and transition to our top 16 quarterback rankings, as I'll share with you guys my perspective and opinion and the statistics that justify my reasoning as to how I think it's all going to be kind of stacked up when it's all said and done by the end of Week 12. Before we begin today's video, for those of you who are new to the channel and you have not yet already, subscribe. We're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. Yesterday, we had our tight end and running back rankings. Today, we'll, of course, do our quarterback rankings, followed by later this afternoon, wide receiver rankings. Tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll be live streaming here on the channel, helping you get your lineup set and ready to go for the Thursday slate of games. Of course, there are 6 teams playing tomorrow. It'll start with the Chicago Bears taking on the Detroit Lions, followed by the Las Vegas Raiders, Dallas Cowboys, and in the night game will be the Buffalo Bills taking on the New Orleans Saints. Do not forget, there are also 2 teams on bye, the Arizona Cardinals and Kansas City Chiefs. Now, outside of all that pertinent information, there's other information that you guys should know about. Of course, first and foremost, Underdog Fantasy. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out already, there's a link down in the description. For those of you who are trying to play more and more fantasy sports, not even just the NFL, but the NBA, NHL, this is the place to do it. If you go down to the link in the description, you can go over to their website and check it out. Again, if you use promo code Andrew today, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. I participate in so many of their contests on a weekly basis. I mean, this upcoming Thursday, there are 3 specific contests. I mean, never has that been the case for the NFL. Typically, there's a Sunday contest in which there's all the teams combined, and in the Sunday night game. Typically, you don't see this many contests. I've already drafted some teams there. Again, it's a way to go ahead, draft the players that you want, compete against thousands of other fantasy participants across the landscape, and win yourself some cash. So if you're interested, check that out. There's a lot of fun to be had. I've been mentioning it on the channel, showing you guys my progress in terms of ranking amongst the top and continuing to go forward and winning some money there. So if you're interested, use promo code Andrew today. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and let's transition to the quarterback conversation here for Week 12 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Do not forget, rankings are subject to change. But before we get into rankings, of course, let's talk about matchups at the quarterback position. As you can see to the left of me, we have the 2021 fantasy points allowed. These statistics convey the idea as to how many points defenses are giving up to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. The Washington football team, Tennessee Titans, Atlanta Falcons, Kansas City Chiefs, Indianapolis Colts, they have been giving up the most points per week to opposing quarterbacks, each of them over 20 plus points. So typically, you want to go after those said matchups. For example, Russell Wilson, I know he's been struggling as of late, but he takes on the Washington football team. The Tennessee Titans against Mac Jones. I know Mac Jones hasn't played the greatest football. Typically, they rely upon the running game. For him to score a 3-touchdown game, it is extremely rare to do so. Outside of that, the Atlanta Falcons, of course, giving up a bunch of points to opposing quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence, not someone that we want to take advantage of. Again, these rookie quarterbacks haven't been reliable enough to start them on a weekly basis. Kansas City's on a bye week, but the Indianapolis Colts, they'll have their hands full with Tom Brady, who is leading the National Football League in total passing touchdowns. Again, you want to take advantage of those given matchups. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, where we have teams like the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots, the Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos giving up the fewest points to opposing quarterbacks, that does arise some questions as to whether or not we feel comfortable playing our respective quarterbacks in said matchups. Ryan Tannehill taking on the New England Patriots. Besides the fact that he has a difficult matchup, he's probably not going to have A.J. Brown. Of course, Marcus Johnson's going to the injured reserve. Julio's still out. Derrick Henry's still out. They just cut Adrian Peterson yesterday. And I'm sure there's even more injuries that we are not aware of within the organization offensively. Obviously, we probably want to pivot from that scenario. Justin Herbert taking on the Denver Broncos. Is that something that I'm worried about? Not really. Justin Herbert has had himself a pretty good track record against that team, specifically last season. And that team has given up their fair share of points in the last couple games that they've played. Obviously, coming off the bye week, an extra week of preparation for Justin Herbert, but they'll definitely have their hands full trying to handle him. Of course, the Carolina Panthers taking on Tua. Tua was extra efficient last week when he took on the New York Jets. Well, I think it was an 80% passing completion percentage. Even in such a difficult matchup, maybe he could be a viable streaming option. Either way, just wanted to present this information. I'll refer back to these statistics as we progress through the video, but these are the matchups going into Week 12. All right, let's get into this. Again, starting off with our top 16 list, we have quarterback Lamar Jackson. Now, there's been a couple weeks in a row here where I have him at the top because truth be told, I mean, his schedule is extremely easy going forward. I know against Miami, he didn't play well. Obviously, should have had himself a significantly better game. Obviously, didn't play last week due to the illness that he's been dealing with. And hopefully, will be participating in this week's game, specifically because they play against the Cleveland Browns and the track record that Lamar has against that organization. Within the division, Lamar Jackson in the last 2 seasons, 2019 and 2020, has completely destroyed the Cleveland Browns defense. In fact, in every single one of the contests that he's participated against them, the 4 games, he has scored a minimum of 3 touchdowns in every single one of them. His fantasy point totals in those 4 contests, 27.5, 34.92, 24.48, and 29.82. I mean, we can't ask for anything more than perhaps something similar to that. If we're able to get Lamar Jackson back and ready and healthy, of course, we saw that Marquise Brown was practicing earlier today. With the pieces surrounding him, this offense is going to take the next step. Of course, they were able to function even with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. Lamar is a significantly bigger upgrade, and once he's in the lineup against a team like the Cleveland Browns, who offensively haven't been able to do much and defensively are suffering because of it, I think Lamar Jackson will be at an incredible advantage this upcoming week. Moving on to our number 2, we have Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the New York Giants, giving up the 11th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention Jalen Hurts is mainly because, again, he has been unbelievable in terms of his overall productivity. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, well, he hasn't really done much through the passing game, and that's absolutely accurate. He hasn't thrown for over 200 passing yards since Week 7 against the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, you know, the entire value of Jalen Hurts isn't going to potentially hinge on whether or not he's able to get it done through the air, because we know his primary value is as a mobile quarterback. And whatever you get in the passing game is just gravy on top of what he's been able to do on the ground. And I mentioned this exactly last week. When you have a quarterback that has the upside of scoring 2 touchdowns on the ground, that makes him so much more of a potential safer play than any of these other quarterbacks who could disappear within the blink of an eye. Again, last week we saw Dak Prescott with minimal points. Of course, Russell Wilson disappeared again. Patrick Mahomes disappeared again. But when you have a quarterback who is eclipsing their total numbers from last week just via rushing yards alone, it kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective as to how valuable running is at the quarterback position. Jalen Hurts is coming off of a week in which, yes, he only had 147 passing yards, 69 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns for 30.78 fantasy points. This season already, he's averaging 56 rushing yards per game and has totaled 8 rushing touchdowns. He's been absolutely incredible. The New York Giants matchup is a very easy one in my opinion, and he should be an incredible play. Moving on to Josh Allen at number 3. You know, it's been a little bit low-key, but a lot of people aren't really paying attention to just how inefficiently Josh Allen has been playing as of late. Now, obviously, they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple weeks back. They lost to the Indianapolis Colts last week. The AFC South has kind of been, putting it to them. But in terms of throwing interceptions and turning over the ball, he's been just like Patrick Mahomes as of late. There's been 5 interceptions from Josh Allen in just the last 3 weeks. When you're making this many mistakes at the quarterback position, my opinion kind of leans towards thinking, well, the Buffalo Bills aren't running the ball enough or not efficiently enough to where you can keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands and get the play action working for this offense. Because when there's defenders just sitting in cover 3, cover 2 shells the entire game, of course, it's going to be that much more difficult to throw the ball. And we know that the Buffalo Bills only thrive in throwing the ball. They have not really had an established running game outside of Josh Allen himself over the last couple seasons. Now, with that all being said, he has the privilege of taking on the New Orleans Saints defense on Thursday night. Again, the New Orleans Saints, they've given up the 8th most points to opposing quarterbacks. I think this is an easier matchup for him. But again, he's got to stop turning over the ball. The running game has to appear. It's probably not going to against the New Orleans Saints, so it's going to be all on his shoulders on whether or not he can sling the ball, get it to his receivers, and dominate through the air and hope that this secondary for the New Orleans Saints falls apart. Moving on, we have Tom Brady, our number 4, taking on the Indianapolis Colts, giving up the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Tom Brady, like I mentioned during the matchup portion, has scored the most touchdowns or passed the most touchdowns amongst all quarterbacks this season already with 29. I mean, being number 1 in the league based on his age and this offense, it's unbelievable. But we know Bruce Arians, Byron Leftwich, they like to throw the ball out. There's a reason why Tom Brady threw the ball 46 times on Monday night against the New York Giants. Now, specifically in that matchup, that was a one-sided affair. And outside of the first half where it relatively looked competitive, in that second half, it was a one-sided matchup. And there's a reason why Tom Brady wasn't able to get more than 20 fantasy points, mainly because they didn't really have to throw the ball much in the second half. They were killing clock, and that was it. Now, when they take on the Indianapolis Colts, this should be more of an exciting matchup where both teams are consistently scoring back and forth. And with that being the case, of course, it will elevate Tom Brady's overall presence and play. I think Tom Brady will get back to his, couple games this season. I think he's already had 5 games of 4 or more touchdowns this season. If he'll get back there, of course, we'll be in a pretty good spot this week. Moving on to Dak Prescott, our number 5. Now, I've, contemplated this decision, all morning long, but I think Dak Prescott is a perfect number 5 play this week, mainly because the matchup's great against the Las Vegas Raiders, but on top of that, you get Ezekiel Elliott fully practicing. Earlier today, there was no indication of Tyron Smith being on the injury list, so he should be full go, and CeeDee Lamb is going to be practicing today. I don't know how you can clear concussion protocol in 2 or 3 days, but Najee Harris was able to do it in 2 or 3 drives on Sunday Night Football. But either way, when I look at what we're potentially dealing with here, if we're going to have a full-powered Dallas Cowboys offense from offensive line, receiving core, running backs, and then you get DeMarcus Lawrence coming back defensively, this team is going to be firing on all cylinders on Thursday, trying to get a little bit of revenge of their terrible performance that they put forth on Sunday afternoon. I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to put it on the Las Vegas Raiders, unfortunately. The Raiders are going to have their hands full. Dak Prescott probably gets back to throwing his 3+ touchdowns per game. That's what I expect this week with all Cowboys ready to go. Moving on to Justin Herbert, our number 6. Justin Herbert coming off a fantastic week of 34.28 fantasy points. The impressive part wasn't just the ability to throw the ball for 382 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. The impressive part was rushing for 90 yards. That is absolutely insane. Now, of course, the defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't have TJ Watt, didn't have Joe Hayden, Minkah Fitzpatrick. That certainly makes a huge difference in terms of what we could have potentially seen in terms of that defense stopping Justin Herbert. But nonetheless, going into this upcoming week's matchup against the Denver Broncos, I think Justin Herbert has already proven that in his career he can play well against them. Last season, in the 2 games that he plays against them, he was able to eclipse 250 passing yards in both games and had a total of 4 passing touchdowns in those 2 games. So as long as he's able to put forth that kind of consistent play, especially against a defense like the Denver Broncos, then of course he will maintain in my lineup and be a great overall play this week. Moving on, Cam Newton's our number 7, the thumbnail for today's video. I think Cam Newton, the way that he plays football, is just perfectly made for fantasy football. The ability to run at the quarterback position is extremely valuable. For those of you who had my draft guide this offseason, you guys know what kind of stats back, the support of having a rushing quarterback. It is unbelievable the advantage you have on a weekly basis when you have a consistent mobile quarterback that is scoring points in bunches. The fact that Cam Newton was able to get himself 46 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown for 26.16 total fantasy points, and the ability to have Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. He's the best check down player in the entire National Football League. His ability to make plays after the catch is, second to none in the National Football League. So Cam Newton, his best friend's back in the backfield. He stands behind a significantly better offensive line than he has had in the past with the Carolina Panthers. And I think going forward, this upcoming week against the Miami Dolphins defense, if Joe Flacco could come in and throw for 2 passing touchdowns, I absolutely believe Cam Newton can have himself an incredible day as our number 7. Moving on, Matthew Stafford's our number 8 coming off of the bye week. Matthew Stafford, in the last 12 games that he has played against the Green Bay Packers in his career, of course, with the Detroit Lions specifically, in 10 of those last 12 games, he has thrown for 2 or more passing touchdowns. So, what do I anticipate from Matthew Stafford? He has a lot of experience against his defense, and his defense has kind of gotten a lot of, praise in the last couple weeks based on the fact that they were able to play extremely well against the Arizona Cardinals on that Thursday night game. They played well against Kansas City and Seattle just recently. But what about Kirk Cousins going for 341 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns and completely torching that defense? I think we're going to see more of that. I think Matthew Stafford, the gunslinger, someone that is very comfortable with that in-division rival. Of course, that's why Kirk Cousins was able to play so well against Green Bay. Matthew Stafford should be in line to have a great overall performance. Again, this upcoming week will have a bigger role for Odell Beckham Jr. in the lineup. Of course, the last time we saw this team, it was a couple days after losing Robert Woods, who is a huge part of that offense, not even just in the receiving game, but in terms of the run blocking game. He's their best run blocking wide receiver. And according to Pro Football Focus, was amongst the top 10 in terms of run blocking grades at the wide receiver position. Nonetheless, I think Odell Beckham Jr., his presence, knowing the offense more and being on the field more often will certainly lead to their overall success. Matthew Stafford should be in a good spot here. Moving on to the second half of the quarterback conversation, beginning with Aaron Rodgers. Now, earlier today, Aaron Rodgers was asked in an interview how his toe was doing, and he did confirm that he has a fractured toe. Based on what I heard in earlier interviews this week, it seems to be his pinky toe. So as long as he's okay there, he should be fine. He was able to throw for 385 yards and 4 passing touchdowns. I'm sure they're giving him painkillers. He'll be fine. My concern isn't really the toe, because yes, it may, reduce his overall mobility. My concern is the fact that one of his best offensive linemen is out with an ACL injury. Not David Bakhtiari, because David Bakhtiari had a knee scope the other day, but another one of their offensive linemen is out for the season. This as a whole is very, worrisome to me. But, we know that the Packers offense as a whole, they've been able to kind of fill in despite all of the injuries or absences they've had all season long, except for one, Aaron Rodgers. He himself is going to make this offense significantly better. I saw Aaron Jones is practicing this week. The last time we saw Rodgers take on the Los Angeles Rams defense, it was in the playoffs in 2020, or earlier this season in January in the 2020-2021 playoffs. He was able to throw for 296 yards, scored 3 touchdowns. I think something similar to that may be underway here. Moving on, Kirk Cousins, our number 10. Again, Kirk Cousins has kind of made a little bit of a jump in the last couple of weeks, because I know he had a little bit of a hot start, then was a little quiet, but just recently, obviously a couple weeks back, Kubiak, their offensive coordinator, came out and said, we need to get Justin Jefferson more involved. And with that, we've seen Kirk Cousins go from a mediocre quarterback back to being in that top 12 conversation every single week. Of course, in the last 2 weeks already, against the Green Bay Packers and of course the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Jefferson has garnered 21 total targets that have led to 17 receptions, 312 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. That kind of production doesn't just help Justin Jefferson and his managers in fantasy football, but of course Kirk Cousins and his overall baseline of production. When you have your number one receiver popping off every single game, getting the value targets that he requires, well, of course, everyone is going to succeed and the offense is going to look significantly better. And that is exactly what's happened. Hopefully, they'll continue with that, which I expect them to do. They take on the 49ers this week, one of the easier matchups at the quarterback position, giving up the 12th most points. I think Kirk Cousins is in good hands, playing against his former coach, Shanahan. Should be an exciting one here. Moving on to Joe Burrow, our number 11. Now, Joe Burrow, yes, he didn't have the greatest fantasy game. 9.02 fantasy points at a standard 4-point per passing touchdown league. It's not great, but he wasn't bad. 20 for 29 passing, almost a 70% passing completion percentage, only 148 passing yards and 1 touchdown. I understand those are not great numbers, but they didn't really have to do much. They handed the ball off to Joe Mixon 30 times, guys. And when you're efficiently running the ball at that kind of level, and you've already mounted a lead in which you're going ahead and just dumpstering the defense, then why not just continue to run the ball, continue to run the clock out, and let's go home early. And that's exactly what they did. I think going into this upcoming week, it's going to be a little bit of a different script here. Of course, we just saw Justin Herbert completely torch this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I think Joe Burrow could very easily do so, not only because of Justin Herbert and his presence, but what we saw earlier this season in week 3 from Joe Burrow. In that contest, Joe Burrow threw for 3 touchdowns on only 14 passing completions. So imagine, this guy's only getting better every single week. The pieces around him are continuing to play better. Joe Mixon in the running game is certainly going to be an active part, but as long as Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, they're out there, Joe Burrow's in a good spot. Moving on to Russell Wilson, our number 12. Again, like I mentioned, Russell Wilson has been playing terrible as of late. The Seattle Seahawks as a whole, defensively, have been a shell of themselves. In the last 2 weeks, Russell Wilson has had a 51.51% passing completion percentage. That is absolutely embarrassing for a quarterback that has been, a top 12 quarterback in fantasy football for the last decade. Now, when we talk about what Russell Wilson's potential is this upcoming week, of course, taking on the Washington football team, does help. It really does. But the Washington football team have looked better in the last couple weeks. I think it's up to Russell Wilson on whether or not he's able to take the next step. Throwing for only 200 passing yards, not able to get into the red zone, the running game not being active enough to at least get them solidified value. I think there's some troubles to be had here, but I'm hoping Russell Wilson, they're going to look in the mirror, they're going to reestablish everything and let this man cook, air it out the entire game. And honestly, just let this man throw the ball legitimately 40, 50 times a game. Not 26 times, because you're not getting into a rhythm there, especially when your offense is just not able to run the ball. All right, either way, moving on. We have our number 13, Derek Carr, taking on the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday, tomorrow, in the Thursday night Thanksgiving matchup. So what exactly do we anticipate from Derek Carr? Again, he's been a consistent quarterback. Though this last week, the offense just was in complete shambles, we have to put it in perspective. When the running game for the Las Vegas Raiders is not functioning, we are not going to see top-level success from Derek Carr. They need to establish the run, and I don't know if they're going to be able to, and that's why I have Derek Carr just a little bit outside of the top 12. He's certainly going to have the ability to sling the ball and probably throw for over 250 passing yards and probably get himself 2 touchdowns, but his upside is extremely limited once, in fact, we realize that Josh Jacobs and this running attack is not up to par as to what we've seen in seasons past. At this moment, Derek Carr, a decent, consistent play, but nothing of incredible upside. Moving on, Taylor Heinicke's our number 14. Taylor Heinicke's been playing out of his mind. I mean, 72% passing completion percentage this last week against the Carolina Panthers defense. Of course, was able to put up 23.14 fantasy points, coming off of back-to-back huge victories, beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, then followed by the Carolina Panthers. They pretty much have the NFC South number, but here's my question. If we can go ahead and see Colt McCoy absolutely dominate that Seattle Seahawks defense, then why not Taylor Heinicke? I think Heinicke's in a very advantageous position based on the fact that the Seattle Seahawks defense hasn't been able to do much. I mean, when I'm watching film, their effort level in terms of making tackles is a shell of what it used to be. I feel like that team is giving up for some reason. They've already kind of packed it in. They think the season's over. But what I do expect to see is Taylor Heinicke balling out, getting the job done. And of course, as long as the running game is active and moving the ball, similar to the way that we've seen in the last couple of weeks here, Taylor Heinicke's job is that much easier to accomplish, and that's what I expect. Moving on, we have Tua Tagovailoa as our number 15. Again, I talked about this earlier. An 82% passing completion percentage, 27 for 33 against the New York Jets. Now, overall, that's just incredible. Efficiency, accuracy, perfect. Even without Devontae Parker and Will Fuller, he's still able to get these numbers accomplished. That is just as good as you can possibly get. Going into this week, I do expect Myles Gaskin to have a little bit more of a difficult time running the ball, which will force it more to Tua, of course, slinging the ball in the direction of a Mike Gesicki, Jalen Waddle, Mac Hollins, etc., etc. Overall, he's played extremely consistent since coming back from his rib injury, and as long as he's healthy and in the lineup, I mean, he's pretty much been in this conversation of being a top 16 for the last couple weeks here, and he'll continue to maintain that. Our final quarterback for today is Carson Wentz, our number 16, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know that their secondary has not performed very well all season long, but I want to just kind of explain to you guys why I believe, Carson Wentz has the potential of having, once again, one of those upside performances. In the last 2 weeks, Carson Wentz has been 10 or less points in fantasy football, mainly because it has been a full-on rushing assault from the Indianapolis Colts. Now, from weeks 4 through 9, this man was throwing 2+ touchdowns in every consecutive week. I mean, he was just doing it every week throughout that span of time. So if we can get back to that position in which, of course, it's a little bit more difficult running the ball, specifically against Tampa Bay, and you're forced to throw the ball, well, of course, Michael Pittman Jr., T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox, even Nyheim Hines or Jonathan Taylor out of this backfield, they gave him a great opportunity to being one of these upside players. I mean, if you can see Daniel Jones have himself a great first half there, regardless of what the heck was going on in that offense and Jason Garrett being fired a day later, I'm very certain that Frank Wright's going to put together a great game plan here for Carson Wentz and find some success. The last player that I wanted to mention as an honorable mention is Jimmy Garoppolo as a sneaky number 17. Jimmy Garoppolo has had 2 or more touchdowns in 4 consecutive games. If you're interested in something like that, they take on Minnesota, who have given up the 6th most points to opposing quarterbacks this season. That is a sneaky number 17. Outside of that, those are our Week 12 quarterback rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew today and play in tomorrow's contest draft today and have some fun tomorrow afternoon. Outside of that, also, be sure to subscribe. Click the like button down below. And later this afternoon, of course, we will have our wide receiver rankings video. Until then, thank you for watching, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys. Peace.